Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Constricted and Addicted. I'm Gary, and I'm going to start making more videos. I'm going to start reformatting the channel a little bit to focus more on reticulated pythons. I'm coming to understand and just believe for myself that the reticulated pythons give me a lot more joy than any of the other snakes that I have owned. I've got here Scarface, aka Dio, aka whatever we've named this guy. He's had a couple of names over the past, but he's got the name Scarface. And I want to explain the name Scarface to you right after this. I want to thank everybody for sticking around. The people that have messaged me, asked me how I'm doing, what's going on with the channel. And I've also had a couple of new subscribers contact me and say they can't wait for content to be brought onto the channel. So I've been feeling like, man, I really need to start doing something with the channel a little more often. And I was invited on to Sexton and Flexon, which is a podcast run by FTL Reptiles and Chris, and I believe he is Sexton and Flexon on Instagram. They had invited me onto their channel, and I think that was really the catalyst for me that kind of put a fire underneath me and really wanted to do something different with this channel. So what I've done is that, like I said, we're going to talk primarily about reticulated pythons. And what we're going to start here is basically, I don't know if you want to call it a series, but what I'm going to do is just going to do a number of episodes on the care and keeping of these beautiful animals. Again, this is Scarface. And let's see if we can get Scarface up to the camera, because Scarface is just a beautiful animal. He is from Chris McVicker. A pied reticulated python is just an amazing animal. Chris had given him to me to raise. And I appreciate Chris trusting in me and believing in me to take care of this beautiful animal. I'm not going to say he's been easy. He's been a little bit of a handful. But I think that's all territory that comes along with learning reticulated pythons and keeping them as pets. And the first series that I'm going to do is going to be an introduction to reticulated pythons. And what I'm going to do is kind of break it down into 4 weeks. And on the 4th week, what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called Retic Rant, where I'm going to invite some guests on. We're going to do a live stream, invite other people on to ask questions and kind of interact with everybody that we've got on the show. This month, at the end of the month, we will have Chris McVicker, Abby from the Curly-Haired Reptile Keeper, Taylor from D&T Retics, and we will have Tim from Intrepid Exotics. It ought to be an exciting and great episode. I hope you all tune in for it. This will be a live stream right here on this channel. And let's get into one of the first things that I want to talk about, making sure that you're understanding the care and keeping of a reticulated python. And that is social media and the reticulated python. Even when I'm looking at social media, if I'm looking at Instagram, that's primarily where I do a lot of my social media, is I see a lot of people that have reticulated pythons. And I think some of the problems that take place is that keepers like myself, we put these animals out such a beautiful light because they are. But behind the scenes, what's not seen is all the work that goes into taking care of one of these animals. For instance, when I got Dio was not the nicest animal in the world. He wasn't the meanest animal in the world. I think Cora still has the record for that. He was very, very scared. He was not comfortable at all with handling. And I've really had to work with this animal to get him to where he's at now, where he's explorative. I've had to think outside the box, and I've had to really try to focus his attention on other things to get him out of this fear zone that he was in. And now he's just a wonderful, wonderful animal. But what happens is that we put pictures of these beautiful animals on social media, and somebody who may not have any idea about reticulated pythons may see these pictures and go, hey, I want one. So sometimes I think that social media can be a double-edged sword when it comes to reticulated pythons. And I think it's important that if you've never owned a reticulated python, if you've never handled a reticulated python, it's important to do your research. There's so much internet information available to us today. And I'm not talking social media groups on Facebook or anything like that. I'm talking that there are keepers out there that have hundreds and hundreds of videos on their channels that tell you how they keep these beautiful reticulated pythons. I know that when I got my first one, Cora, she was a handful. She had bit me, she had bit my wife. She was striking constantly at air. I didn't really know what to do. And what I Googled was taming down a defensive reticulated python. And there was so many videos that became available to me, and there was information in there. And just like anything else that we do, we kind of filter through what works and what doesn't work. And what I ended up doing was putting big jackets on and gloves on. And what they were doing is that they were, if the snake was to bite, it would bite, but it wouldn't hurt them. And it wasn't stressing the animal out. One of the other things that I was learning is that 15 minutes of positive interaction with your animal, taking them out and letting them do what they want, and then putting them away without getting, stressed out or defensive. That was good for the animal, and it was good for the relationship that's being developed with the animal. So those were everything I did. And I did that consistently for like 3 weeks. And finally I got to the point where I could handle Cora. I could take the gloves off. I could take the jacket off. We really started to have a very good relationship to what we have now. And with most every reticulated python that I've gotten, some of them haven't had to have that much work. This one here is definitely had to have a little bit more work because I believe that he's got a little bit of a sight problem, and it's no fault to his own. His umbilical cord was wrapped around his head when he was born. So he's got a little bit of a cleft lip, and his eyes are a little bit sunken in, but at any rate, he's a beautiful, beautiful animal. I think he's got a little bit of a sight impingement, so that's why he might be a little bit more flighty, a little bit more cautious, and a little bit more, defensive than some other reticulated pythons. But we've worked together now for quite some time, and a lot of that has gone away. And it's just been consistency. I didn't really know what to do. I searched on the internet, and I thought outside the box. Sometimes we have to cater to the animal to get what we need and make them comfortable. The next topic I want to talk about is understanding their care. Reticulated pythons are definitely not like any other reptile that you could possibly think of. Number one is their sheer size. And I'm talking about mainlands, I'm talking about dwarves, I'm talking about super dwarves. These animals can get larger than most other snakes that you have commercially available to you. Burmese pythons can get very, very close in size range, but we're talking a mainland reticulated python. A female mainland reticulated python can get anywhere between 14, 18 feet long, and in some cases, 20 feet long, and feeding regimens are not going to slow them down. So this is something that is the first thing that needs to be really understood about the reticulated python when you purchase it is, do you have the capacity to take care of an animal that's going to be bigger than you in a few short years? Caging requirements are massive for these animals. They can outgrow a 4-foot enclosure within the first 2 years of their life, sometimes even within the first year of their life. They are very fast growers, so it's important that you really do your research on how are you going to house this animal? How are you going to take care of this animal? Do you look into the future of when this animal is 10, 12 feet long and less than 5 years old? Are you still going to be able to take care of it? One of the other things that people tend to look past is feeding these animals. And right now, Scarface eats a medium-sized rat. And sooner or later, he's going to be moving into a large rat. This animal was born on April 4th, 2022. So he's less than a year old. In the 6 months that I've had him, he has probably grown twice his size. He was just a little guy when we got him, and he's still just a little guy. But as you can see, he's pretty lean and he's pretty long. So he'll probably be moving up to the large rats here fairly soon. I've got a 3-year-old mainland reticulated python that's eating rabbits. So this is something you really have to ask yourself. Can you feed rabbits, pigs to your reticulated python? And do you have access to animals like that to feed to your reticulated python when they're older and larger? The next thing I'd like to talk about is the commitment that it takes to own one of these animals. These animals are not just something that lives for, 5-10 years. These are animals that live for up to 30 years. Hang on just a second. I think she's okay. Reticulated pythons are extremely curious animals. So what they like to do is try to get as far as they can and get into things they're not supposed to get into, not because they're trying to get away, but because they're naturally curious animals. Georgia, a lot of people know Georgia. She is a beautiful reticulated python. I call her a 50% Calatoa, but she is just a dream animal. Very, very wonderful, manageable to hold and to love on. But like I say, these animals are a commitment. They live a long time. So if you plan on owning a reticulated python, plan on owning it for a long time. One of the big things that I see people buy a reticulated python out of a whim, right? And then the animal will end up on Craigslist for sale because they got an apartment. The animal was getting too big for the apartment. It was a cute little animal when they got it. And then all of a sudden they turned around. It was 6 foot long. They can't take care of it anymore. This all falls back on to do your research. And before you make a commitment to buy a reticulated python, these are such wonderful animals, but not everybody is geared to own one of these animals. Not everyone has got the space and the time and the commitment that it takes to take one of these animals and dedicate time to it so that it has a good life to live. Georgia is super curious and just beautiful. I love what I get from owning these animals. So please make sure you do your research, check the animals out, make sure that you are up to the commitment. And there's much more than just the lifespan of the animal that goes with the commitment. There's the feeding of the animal. There's the making sure that you've got the money for the heating, everything else that it takes to keep this animal healthy, safe, and happy. And last but not least, and I think we've kind of covered the topic, is do your research. YouTube has so many people out there that if you were to search reticulated python care in the search bar at YouTube, you're going to find a plethora of people that own these animals, that have videos up, that have care for them. There's so many different aspects on whatever you're looking for in a reticulated python, whether it's how do you handle a reticulated python? How do you care for a reticulated python? What size enclosure? If you type these things in, there is somebody out there who has already done this research, probably put it in a video and placed it on YouTube for someone like me or you to go and look and find and really dive in and make sure that if you want to purchase a reticulated python, that you are able to do that, that you are ready for the commitment of an animal that starts out somewhere around this big and then ends up twice as big as what Georgia is. So do yourself a favor, do the research, understand what you're getting yourself into, make sure that you cover all your bases, because the 8-foot enclosure is good, but when you have a 14 to 16 foot animal, you're probably going to need a larger enclosure than a regular off-the-shelf 8-foot enclosure. So you're probably going to have to get a custom built enclosure, and those enclosures can cost a lot of money. So you don't need it right away, but just make sure that in the next 5 years, take a plan. If you buy a reticulated python, look at the next 5 years of owning that animal. Think about the money that you're going to invest into that animal. Think about the size that this beautiful animal is going to get. Think about the feeding requirements for it. And if you still believe that after setting that 5 years that you can take care of that animal, then maybe a reticulated python is what you want. I always tell people that start small. Start with a ball python. Keep a ball python for about a year. And if you know what, if that ball python is too small, if you want something a little more, active, then go to a boa constrictor. And if that boa constrictor is not still active enough or something, you want something more, then maybe move into a Burmese python or a reticulated python. Just make sure that you do your research before you purchase this beautiful animal.